everyone. Welcome back to the Concussion Discussions brought to you by Integrated Brain Centers. I am your host, Amy Zellmer from Faces of TBI, and I am here today with Dr. David Traster from Neurological Wellness Institute. And today he's going to be talking all about neurofatigue after concussion. So welcome, Dr. Traster. Good to see you again.
Always great to see you.
Yeah, well, I think this is a super important topic. The whole neurofatigue. And I remember it's unlike anything I'd ever experienced before. Like you just hit a wall and there's zero anything left. And it's so hard to explain to people. And really the only way to regenerate is like to go take a nap. And you know, I was taking like 3-4 naps a day in the beginning. So I am really excited to hear what you have to share with us today.
Absolutely. So I just want to, it's a big issue. A lot of people don't even know about mental fatigue until it happens to them. You know, people typically know about physical fatigue. I went out, exercised, I played a sport, or I did something. I went hiking, you know, I did something and now I'm tired. I'm going to take a nap. Or even I sat in the sun for 3 hours.
Right.
You know, just sitting in the sun, I'm wiped out. But no one really understands, why did I just do a 20-minute phone call and I got to go take a nap? And so I think it's important to understand a little bit about generally how the brain works, because it's a little counterintuitive. And so we know, based on general studies looking at like PET scans, which look at brain activity, they did 2 different studies we'll talk about. One study is they looked at, let's say, professional musicians. And they looked at brain activity of how much does your brain become active compared to someone who's not a professional piano player versus someone who's a professional piano player. At the same time, they did another study, and there was like an IQ test, right? Or it was like an SAT score or SAT test. And they looked and said, is there different brain activity compared to someone with a higher IQ versus a lower IQ? You know, if they're doing the same test, what do their brains look differently? And the idea was, what they thought was, obviously, the smarter people or the pro musicians, they're going to have more brain activity because they can do things at a higher level. So because they could do things at a higher level, or they're more intelligent, that their brains should be working more. What they found was it was the opposite. It was the people that were better, or the people who had a higher IQ, they actually had less energy they were using for the tasks. And so it became this idea of this brain efficiency.
Yeah.
And they started looking at neural efficiency as the more expertise you are at something, or the more intelligent you are on a topic, your brain can actually do the job with less architecture. And it's like learning a car. It's always a good example, because when you first learn how to drive, for most people, they're freaking out. They don't want to hit anybody. You know, they're going slow. They don't want to get pulled over. They're worried about parallel parking. And when you look at what the brain's doing, the brain has all this new information. It's lit up like a Christmas tree. Right? And it's just lit up, and it's trying to find the right ways to figure it out. And then once it figures it out, it consolidates those pathways and those systems and makes what we call subcortical. And this is why you could start driving down the highway and realize the last 20 minutes, he's going to be like dozing off. But you've been driving, if a light stopped in front of you, right? You put on the brakes. So if something came to your attention, it would make you change your flow. But the fact is, the brain is so efficient that unless something changes, usually it just assumes nothing changed. So assuming that guy's going 50 miles per hour and you're 5 cars away going 50 miles per hour, assuming that that stays the same, your brain is on auto drive, because all you have to do is stay in that lane, and you have all this architecture in your brain that could talk on the phone, could look around, could do all these other things as you do a learned task like driving. But then all of a sudden you see a red light flash and it signals to your brain that's different. And cognitively, your attention goes over there and says, that's a brake light, I've got to slow down. So that's the big picture, is the more efficient your brain is, the less energy you need. And part of the theory of why we walk on 2 feet versus other animals that walk on 4 is walking on 2 for human beings is more energy efficient. And it's actually saves energy. When you look at arm swing, when people swing their arms when they walk, one of the big reasons that's for is based on the research, it helps you glide more and there's less up and down, and it's energy efficient. And so when you start looking at the brain and the body, it's all about saving energy. So how does that relate to a concussion? Now we'll take that idea and think about like a baby. When you look at a baby and how a baby moves, it's very clumsy. It's very ataxic and like tremory. And then as it learns, the brain starts to figure out how to move, and it just automatically learns and automates it. And it just starts figuring out, so you don't have to use as much architecture. And then you go through your life just automated, and you have all this free territory to do all these complex things human beings can do, because these complex areas of your brain shouldn't be worried about not falling, or shouldn't be worried about trying not to be dizzy or trying to stop your eyes from having nystagmus. They should be free to be a human being, right? And so what we see is that after a brain injury, those pathways get affected, and brain recovery looks a lot like brain development, both neurologically, both functionally, both clinically, both from a rehab standpoint. A lot of similar processes for recovery are similar to development. Certain chemicals, certain pathways. Now development's different, it's healthy. There's stages of developmental periods that are a little more open to genetic changes. But the fact is, we still need to use the same processes to create these new connections. And what happens after a brain injury is, because the brain got injured, it's less efficient. It now has to work energy on trying to heal, and energy that used to be for proper communication might have to be sacrificed. Or to say it differently, you might compensate. And you might compensating maybe with your vision, and because you have a neck injury, and you could start getting visual motion sensitivity. You could start compensating with your neck and start getting headaches. And you could start compensating because at that time of your brain, this was the efficient way to function. But then after a few weeks, the inflammation should calm down. And a lot of people we see post-concussion over an extended period of time, it's not because they're still inflamed, it's because they've compensated, and the compensation was appropriate for the time after the injury, but either they never got the right care, or the care promoted a compensation, or they never got any care, or that was the right therapy for the time, but maybe they got better. Or to say it differently, let me give you a case which really drives me a little crazy. We just saw a police officer, and he got hit in a car 3 years ago. He was in a parked car, got slammed. And then for a week, he got knocked unconscious. For the first week, he wasn't that bad, but was off. About 7 days after the injury, he developed massive, massive headaches and massive, massive stutter, which makes it very difficult for him to communicate.
Wow.
And so when I saw him 3 years later, he came in for headaches, and this was like 2 weeks ago. He came in for headaches, and he came in with this massive dystonia where his head was like this. And he's got movements here, and he's got this massive headaches. The point being is, when you look at dystonia, typically people have like an SCM contracture. They have different head movements. Typically people have this rightward rotation. And he had trouble communicating. People have only so much time to see people. What it turned out, we learned really quickly, is he has double vision everywhere.
Wow.
The only place he doesn't have double vision with his eyes are all the way to the left. So this brain injury prevented him from being cognitively aware of his double vision. In his notes, it said nothing about double vision. The only thing it said about was his headache. And the reason his head was like that, it was his only place you could see single. And I knew because when I moved his eyes middle, his right eye would pop up. And so typically we don't do this so quickly, but I did a couple of things, and I referred him to an optometrist and got him prisms, because he had an inferior rectus palsy. So his one muscle in his eye is where he got hit right here. And when he got prisms, it was his first time he could see in 3 years. And now we're about to work with him, because working with him with double vision all the time, how can I get this to relax when he's going to do this right away to see single? And so the point being is, after an injury, you need to assess and say, what is his brain like now? What was the person like before the injury? What's the person like after the injury? And what's the most appropriate care? Because we're all different before injury. We all have different injuries, and then we're all different after injury. And until you look at each aspect, it's hard to know what's right for that person. For that person, and he went to neuro-ophthalmologist, he went to optometrist, for whatever reason, whether it's a communication issue, people miss the double vision. And so for that case, it's most appropriate for him to see single, because how can we ever get his brain to be efficient if he's seeing double everywhere? He's working twice as hard. He sees two things all the time. And then he's got all his muscle contractions, and he didn't even know that was happening until finally I patched one eye, and he could see single. So back to our point is, how do we get our brain more efficient? We need to look at people's brains and say, what's the status of their brain? What's the status of how they're receiving information? Is their visual system appropriate, right? Can they see single? Can they move their eyes appropriately? What's their inner ear? Are they dizzy? Do they have appropriate activation from the left inner ear to the right inner ear? What information is coming from the neck? Did they have a neck injury? Did they have other things going on in their body that could all integrate differently in the brain? Was there a brain injury? And what we know is, after a brain injury, the brain's going to be less efficient. So our goal as primarily a functional neurology or a rehab clinic, while we do functional medicine, while we do other things, what we strongly believe in is there's not enough clinics that specialize in brain plasticity. And when you look at, like, after a stroke, this is what we know. You can lift as much weights as you want. You can take as much pills as you want, both medication and supplements. In order to get plasticity as functional, you need to do functional activities. And so if you want to if you have a stroke and you want to pick up a glass of water better, there's no pill or supplement or weightlifting exercise that's going to be more beneficial than practicing picking up the glass. And so when you look at someone with a concussion, if somebody comes in and they get fatigued, what's their balance like? What's their gait like? What's their basic functions that run their body efficiently? And are they inefficient in their compensations? Are they not firing the right muscle groups? Are they using wrong brain pathways that are just not efficient? Maybe it keeps their symptoms lower, but at some point it's going to catch up to them. And so what we have to do is work on other pathways to create strength and weaken pathways. Because before you say something, one last point is, when you look at efficiency, you don't need a severe or significant brain injury to really, are you still with me?
Yeah.
Did I lose you?
No.
You're still with me? Okay.
Yep.
So you don't need with me. Okay. So you don't need a severe or significant brain injury, or you don't need pathways to be disrupted to really affect the brain in a major way. Because if one pathway gets injured, even if it's not torn apart, if one pathway is less efficient than another pathway, the brain is going to use the more efficient pathway. And if the brain compensates and uses a more, even if it's a good one, it's just not as good as the other one, your brain is still going to use the one that's not as good, but it's more efficient. And over time, we know when brains stop using pathways, these pathways disappear. And so if you make a compensation and you compensate with whether it's your vision, your inner ear, your neck, whether it's neural pathways, if you make a compensation, you're going to continue down that road. And unless somebody who's trained forces your brain to start utilizing these underutilized pathways that are healthy, that can work, but they haven't been trained, so they're not as efficient as the other ones. And the beautiful thing is, once they start becoming efficient, the brain realizes that they're more efficient and they're a better pathway, and it makes a flip. The hard one is when it's like an axonal injury and those pathways aren't there anymore. Because now you've got to compensate, because you've got to use these ones and make them more efficient. And say, although these pathways are less efficient than the main pathways, it's still the best things we have.
Yeah.
But for other people, you say these aren't permanent injuries. We need to use these pathways and get them more efficient, because if not, what's going to happen to this person's pathway when they're 30 years from now, right? What's going to happen if people don't use these pathways for 20, 30 years post-concussion? That is what we're worried about. We're worried about brains that are underactivated over an extended period of time. And most of my people I see, whether it's athletes or any human being, a lot of times what we see is they are eating better. There's more information on eating. There's tons of information on fish oils and turmeric and resveratrol and different things, which are all positive things and can be, for certain people. But there's not enough information about, what do I do to improve my function? Because I'm taking this, I'm taking that, I'm meditating, I have a red light on my neck, which are all good things. But if you want to think better, what are you doing for that? If you want to be multitasking better, what are you doing for that? If multitasking sitting down is different, multitasking walking. And so how efficient are you walking? How efficient is your balance? How efficient is just your body? Because if you can't move your body efficiently, you're sacrificing mental capacity. And so if you can't move your body efficiently, which is very common after a concussion, you're going to use more energy to sacrifice on your body versus your mental ability. And your brain would rather not fall on your butt than do complex mathematics. Right. And so it's one thing to be sitting down and doing math, it could be hard, But it's another thing doing math with your eyes closed, standing up, or walking down the road, talking on the phone with busy traffic. These are all a lot of stimulation to the brain. And if your brain is not efficient and it hasn't automated things, it's going to be so fatiguing, because the amount of energy that you're using for a simple task is exponentially more than what it should be. And until you could figure out a pattern or a training program to make those pathways more automated, and how do you do it? Just like practicing the piano. You do good form over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. If you want to be a good piano player and not playing the tuba, right? You're playing the piano. If you want to pick up a glass, don't work on your foot strength unless you have to. Work on picking up a glass. A lot of clinics I call like health spas, because they do so much good things that are healthy, but what are they doing specifically for that person and their condition and their brain, right? Like, we love hyperbaric. We're getting hyperbaric. We love neuro. Yeah, we love so many therapies that we do, but they're kind of additional therapies. Our main therapy is our main tool is our training program in our clinic, our assessments, our doctor's intelligence, and to figure out for you what's best for you. And while we have generalized therapies that other people use, we do them specifically to you. Mm-hmm. And all the other stuff is icing on the cake to your brain exercises. And if we can put you in a hyperbaric chamber, it's even better, right? If we can give you good diet, it's even better. If we can give you good supplements, it's even better. But to me, the meat and the potatoes, or, the main dish, if you're a vegetarian, is something is really the brain plasticity, and everything else really just helps and aids the brain plasticity, and plasticity is all functional. So if you're doing something seated down, like dizziness, a lot of people are dizzy, so they do all these head and eye movements. Well, if you get really good doing that sitting down, it doesn't mean you're any good standing up. It just means you're good sitting down, because when you stand up, it's a different context. It's no different why some guys in practice and sports are great and they get into the game and they can't make a shot. Because that context is completely different for the brain. So the more a doctor can match their therapy to the context you want to improve, that's the people you want to be around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, such a great example. And I've kind of explained it, like, when you have like 20 applications open on your computer, mm-hmm. and you can't figure out why it's taking Word 20 minutes to load. Yes. Right? Like, that's what's going on in your brain after a concussion. And the reason I'm so passionate about funk neuro and like the intensive treatment style is you have to get that brain rerouting. The brain's super smart. And when you injure your brain right here, it routes around that injury, but then it never goes back. You have to like force it to go back. And that's what you guys excel at. And
not just that, is you have to, when you look at forcing it to get back, the first week or two of training, you will function better, but it's not long enough to create connections or change of connections or permanent connections. And so part of the reason we like our intensive model, when people fly in, it's like 3 times a day for 5 days or 10 days. When people locally, we might see people locally once a day for 2 or 3 weeks. Mm-hmm. And the reason we like that is we want to force that integration, because it's the integration first. And once they're integrated, they communicate. And once they communicate, they create more connections. But those connections take time. So it might take, or definitely takes more than 2 weeks. So we need to slam as much therapies to create the communication in the front end, and then let people do therapies at home for the next month or 2 or 3 to really cement it. Because if you come to our program for a week or 2 and then just leave and don't do it again, you're going to be a patient that might feel great around us, but then you fell off the wagon because you felt good and you thought it was done, but you didn't create the plasticity. And it's just a educational piece that, again, we all try to be better. I'm sure we failed too much on that, to train or educate our patients on what we do, because we've grown up in a society, and my dad's a pharmacist in a pill-based society where I don't have to do anything. I could take a pill and get better, so we still, and it's okay, but it takes away some of the onus of responsibility that because doing exercises, even just going to the gym, could be fatiguing. It's an extra step. A lot of people getting to the gym is difficult, and it's no different than doing a 2-minute exercise. It's an extra thing. A lot of times people feel better and they assume it's over, but if it's only been a few weeks, you may or may not have fully created long-term connections. And if you go back to your typical routine, your typical environment, and you don't continue with the things that change your brain, your brain will shift again back over until these connections are more permanent.
Yeah. Yeah, I know for me, when I did my intensive treatment, it cleared my eyes, my visual, and my dizziness like that week.
Yeah.
But then it was probably 8 to 10 months of doing my exercises at home and tweaking them a little bit that I really noticed all my other symptoms were drifting away. Like it was a lot more subtle, so I didn't notice them right away. And then one day I was sitting at my computer and I was like, I'm multitasking. And I hadn't multitasked, in 3-4 years. So
yeah. And you got to think too, the way, and that's amazing, because you think about it, the way the brain works is the brain has so much information. And this information is electric signals. And there might be other communications quantumly, but let's talk about electric signals, right? And so you look at these electric signals, with electricity comes extra noise. This is why we have wiring, it spreads. So you get extra noise with electricity. And when you look at a brain, the way a cell in the brain fires is based on electric potential. So the more electricity, the closer it is to firing until it hits a certain point where it fires and you might see something or might feel something. You get an experience. And so when you look at the brain has like a filtering. It says, okay, I get at some point there's extra noise. So we're going to say this is the range we're giving it. And when we get above the range, we're going to say that's real. That's not background noise. What happens with brain injuries, because basal ganglia is an area that gets injured a lot of times, and the thalamus and that connection has a lot to do with that. And what happens is people start building up noise in their brain. The classic example is an autistic child. And an autistic child has so much background noise that one little stimulation is feeding on all this energy. And the fact is we all have that noise, but our brain is healthy enough to filter it out and say, all that background noise is not functional for me. It might serve a purpose, but it doesn't tell me to move my hand. I only get told to move my hand when that area of my brain says move my hand. But if I start getting noise that's enough energy to fire that area, I can move my hand. I can get light sensitivity. I could get tinnitus. It's harder for me to multitask because it's like I have so much noise in my brain already. It's called signal to noise. I can't pick up that signal and I can't be focused because there's so much noise. And the way our brain communicates is a lot about frequencies. It's almost like a radio station, where you have a radio station, he puts a frequency and it's sent over there. And so our brain does the same thing. It's all resonant frequencies. So when areas of the brain that are far away communicate, they fire at the same frequency at the same time and they resonate together. And the more noise, the harder for that combination. And when you look at efficiency and you look at fatigue, this is what you're looking at. You're looking at people typically with a lot of background noise. You're looking at brains that are very inefficient. You're looking at brains that have harder time communicating. So it has more energy to try to force that communication. And that's part of the reason we started doing QEEG testing and mapping, looking at brainwave activity. Because if somebody is so stuck in a certain brainwave, we call it mental flexibility. You have to have the ability to go in different waves, in different contexts. And if you're stuck in beta all the time, you've got terrible anxiety, it's going to be really hard for you to shift into a different frequency and allow your brain to think of anything different or do anything different. And these are people with very fixed motor patterns. And so even simple things, like I work with personal trainers here in the Blackhawks. I work with physical therapists here, work with a lot of people. And I work with them because their training is multi-directional. It's not single plane. And it's very brain healthy because they practice movements. They make people move in ways they're not used to moving. And they put people in positions that challenge them. And like I said, you don't change brain plasticity from being stronger or weightlifting. It's healthy.
Yeah.
It's a good thing to do. Like there's not to discredit it, but you've got to work on movement and control movement. This is why Tai Chi is great. Like all these things that some people laughed about, like one of these weird guys doing these slow movements, that is so healthy for your brain, these control movements, that it's really, we're learning more and more of the positives of it.
Well, awesome. Dr. Traster, this has been awesome information. And I'm so happy to have had you here on the concussion discussions. And your website and all your information is right below this video, but it is neurologicwellnessinstitute.com. And you are on social media as Neurologic Wellness Institute as well. And you guys also offer free consultations to anyone interested, right?
Absolutely. If you just look on the website or if you call up, we have people all the time doing free consults. We're happy to answer any questions. We talk to people all the time trying to find what's the best thing for them.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here today. And this has been great information. So thank you so much for sharing with us.
Thank you, and stay safe.